From New York, this is Democracy Now!
Hearing that the Trump administration wants to expedite executions at the federal level, I have seen from death row in Louisiana and Texas the complete arbitrariness of who gets the death penalty, even though the criteria is supposed to be the worst of the worst. And in fact, it's always people who are poor and almost always people who kill white people.
As the Trump administration moves to restore the federal death penalty, we'll speak with Sister Helen Prejean, leading death penalty activist. The Academy Award-winning film Dead Man Walking was based on her life. But first, we speak to Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Sonia Nazario about how corruption, violence, and U.S. foreign policy are fueling the migrant crisis.
They're mostly fleeing some of the most violent countries on earth, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala. In recent years, I focus on the most vulnerable of those who are coming here from Central America, immigrant children, 5, 10, 12-year-old kids who are trying to get into the United States and flee that violence.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Flights have resumed at Hong Kong's international airport after it was effectively shut down for 2 days due to a takeover by pro-democracy protesters. Tuesday saw new clashes between protesters and police, with several arrests taking place. 2 men who are suspected of being undercover officers from mainland China were beaten by a group of protesters. One of the men turned out to be a reporter for the Communist Party-owned newspaper Global Times. Some of the protesters apologized Wednesday for the disruption at the airport. A post on a messaging channel that was widely reposted read, quote, "We apologize for our behavior, but we're just too scared. Our police shot us. Government betrayed us. Social institutions failed us. Please help us," they said. Hong Kong's Beijing-aligned Chief Executive Carrie Lam warned Tuesday the protests are, quote, pushing Hong Kong onto a path of no return, while China condemned the airport demonstrations as near-terrorist acts. Meanwhile, photos showing Chinese military tanks lining up in Shenzhen near the Hong Kong border started to spread Tuesday, raising fears of a possible military crackdown. China's official state newspaper, The People's Daily, published a statement saying the People's Armed Police are ready to counteract, quote, riots, disturbance, major violence, and crime and terror-related social security issues, unquote. On Tuesday, President Trump tweeted, "Intelligence has informed us that the Chinese government is moving troops to the border with Hong Kong. Everyone should be calm and safe," Trump tweeted. Democratic Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy tweeted in response, "This is not foreign policy." Following condemnation of the new Trump administration rule limiting permanent status for low-income immigrants, Acting Director of Citizenship and Immigration Services, Ken Cuccinelli, attempted to defend the new policy by rewriting the iconic Emma Lazarus poem on the Statue of Liberty. This is Cuccinelli speaking to NPR's Rachel Martin.
Would you also agree that Emma Lazarus's words etched on the Statue of Liberty, "Give me your tired, your poor," are also part of the American ethos?
They certainly are. Give me your tired and your poor who can stand on their own 2 feet and who will not become a public charge. That plaque was put on the Statue of Liberty at almost the same time as the first public charge law was passed. Very interesting timing.
On Tuesday night, Cuccinelli defended his comments in an interview with CNN's Erin Burnett, suggesting Emma Lazarus's poem was written about, quote, people coming from Europe. One of Jeffrey Epstein's accusers is suing his longtime associate and accused accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell, and 3 other members of his household staff in the first lawsuit of its kind since the accused serial sex trafficker died by apparent suicide in his New York jail cell Saturday. Jennifer Arose has accused Epstein of raping her when she was just 15 years old. She says Ghislaine Maxwell and the other unnamed staff members facilitated the abuse. It's one of the first lawsuits to be filed under New York's Child Victims Act, which takes effect today. Meanwhile, questions are mounting surrounding Epstein's death. The warden at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan has since been reassigned, and 2 guards who were tasked with monitoring Epstein were put on leave. Reports emerged Tuesday the guards may have been sleeping during their shift, failing to check on Epstein for 3 hours and then falsifying time logs. They were supposed to check on him every 30 minutes. The facility, which has housed many high-profile prisoners, has been plagued with reports reports of understaffing, overcrowding, dire conditions for years. The Mexican drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman called the prison torture. The FBI, the Justice Department, and the House Judiciary Committee have launched investigations into Epstein's death. In related news, the FBI's raided Jeffrey Epstein's private Caribbean island. The FBI search is being overseen by the Attorney's Office for Southern District of New York. On Monday, Attorney General William Barr assured Epstein's accusers the case against Epstein would not end with his death and that, quote, any co-conspirators should not rest easy. Meanwhile, a flurry of speculations arose after it was revealed that a 4chan user posted about Jeffrey Epstein's death 38 minutes before the news became public on media outlets. The poster revealed information surrounding the death, suggesting they may have been a first responder or otherwise present at the scene when Epstein's body was first discovered. The New York City Fire Department said they investigated the case and determined the information did not come from within their department. Epstein claimed a net worth of more than $500 million when asking to be released on bail, but lawyers for his accusers say they suspect his net worth to be much higher, and they'll look to offshore bank accounts and Epstein's closest allies, including his brother Mark Epstein, for additional assets. The Wall Street Journal reports the brothers are connected financially through investments in a 200-unit condo on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, a condo building. Lawyer Lisa Bloom told the Journal, quote, we're just getting started. To see our 2013 interview with Mark Epstein on an unrelated issue about Cooper Union, go to DemocracyNow.org. At the time, he was chair of the Board of Trustees of Cooper Union. That's Mark Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein's brother. President Trump has delayed a 10% tariff on some Chinese goods, including cell phones, laptop computers, shoes, and toys, until December 15th. Other products will be spared from the tariffs altogether. Trump has repeatedly claimed tariffs would only harm Chinese producers, but appeared to shift his rhetoric slightly Tuesday.
Just in case they might have an impact on people, what we've done is we've delayed it so that they won't be relevant to the Christmas shopping season.
Around $112 billion of Chinese goods will be hit with the planned 10% tariff in September. Last week, the Treasury Department designated China a currency manipulator after it weakened its currency to an 11-year low. In environmental news, a group of 22 states, 6 cities, and the District of Columbia sued the Trump administration Tuesday in an attempt to block the rollback of Obama-era regulations on emissions from coal-fired power plants. The new rules were announced by the Environmental Protection Agency in June and allow states to set their own regulations for emissions and decide whether coal-fired plants should make improvements. Obama's Clean Power Plan sought to lower carbon emissions through federal regulations, but the plan never took effect due to multiple legal challenges. The new lawsuit claims the EPA has a duty under the Clean Air Act to limit carbon emissions. Letitia James, the Attorney General for New York, said in a statement, quote, without significant course correction, we're careening towards a climate disaster. Rather than staying the course with policies aimed at fixing the problem and protecting people's health, safety, and the environment, the Trump administration repealed the Clean Power Act and replaced it with this dirty power rule, she said. In Brazil, up to 2,000 indigenous women gathered in the capital, Brasilia, this week to protest the policies of far-right President Jair Bolsonaro. Hundreds occupied a health ministry building Tuesday as they demanded the government respect indigenous rights on the Amazon. This is Joana Wapichana, the first indigenous woman elected to the Brazilian Congress.
Protest is an important act to defend the rights of indigenous peoples. We are under a series of systematic violent attacks. There's the lack of demarcation of indigenous lands, the issue of health, education. This is all in danger. We are fighting against privatizing for a fairer and quality education.
Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan is in Kashmir today amidst tensions with India over its move last week revoking the special status of the Indian-controlled part of the Muslim-majority region. Indian-administered Kashmir remains on lockdown. Pakistan is calling for the UN Security Council to meet over the escalating situation, which it says poses an imminent threat to peace in the region and could lead to ethnic cleansing and genocide if a major military confrontation erupts. During his visit, Imran Khan condemned India's actions, but said, quote, we're not at war with India, we're against its ideology, he said. Amnesty International Tuesday urged India to lift its restrictions on movement and communications in Kashmir, warning that, quote, a complete clampdown on civil liberties is only likely to increase tensions, alienate the people, and increase the risk of further human rights violations. The family of Saudi women's rights activist Loujain al-Hathloul says she was offered a release from prison in exchange for taping a video retracting accusations she was tortured in jail, an offer she rejected. Hathloul was arrested in May of last year, along with 4 other women activists. She led a movement to lift a ban on female drivers and overhaul the male guardianship system in Saudi Arabia. According to human rights groups and her family, Hathloul has since been held in solitary confinement and has been subjected to abuse, including electric shocks, flogging, and threats of sexual violence. Hathloul's siblings say Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's former top advisor, Saud al-Khatani, who has been implicated in the Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi's murder, was present while she was being tortured and threatened to rape and kill her. To see our interview with Loujain's brother and sister, Walid and Lina Hathloul, go to DemocracyNow.org. Opera superstar Placido Domingo is facing allegations of sexual misconduct in the workplace from at least 9 women spanning a period of 30 years. The women say Domingo regularly harassed them and tried to pressure them into sexual relationships. Several say he forcibly kissed them or touched them without consent. In some cases, he called them incessantly at home, including late at night. 7 of the 9 accusers say their careers were negatively affected after they resisted his advances. Domingo, known by many as one of the famed 3 tenors, is currently the director and conductor of the Los Angeles Opera. The LA Opera said it would hire an outside investigator to look into the claims. He's canceled his tour. CBS and Viacom announced Tuesday they would rejoin forces after splitting in 2006. The 2 companies, along with Paramount Pictures Studio, are attempting to head off competition from entertainment giants like Disney and streaming services, including Netflix. The deal is the latest mega-merger in the media world after AT&T acquired Time Warner for $80 billion and Disney took over 21st Century Fox business for over $70 billion last year. And starting today, survivors of childhood sexual abuse in New York who previously could not bring their perpetrators to court due to statutes of limitations will now be able to do so as the new Child Victims Act goes into effect. The new law allows prosecutors to bring criminal charges against alleged abusers until the accuser turns 28, while accusers can file a civil lawsuit until they reach the age of 55. In addition, the so-called look-back window will allow accusers of any age to bring charges against their alleged perpetrators, no matter how long ago the abuse occurred, for a period of 1 year starting today. This is New York Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul speaking Tuesday.
To the perpetrators, the child molesters, the child abusers, the child predators who made individuals grow up as adults with the worst nightmares you can imagine. Today, your victims will be your worst nightmare, because starting tomorrow, they will see you in court. And I don't care if you're hiding in a rectory somewhere, if you're in a rocking chair in Florida, you will be found and you will be brought to justice. It starts tomorrow here in New York.
That's New York Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul. New York is the 5th state to apply the look-back window. Legal experts say major institutions that have faced sexual abuse scandals in recent years, including the Catholic Church in New York, are likely to face a litany of lawsuits. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Those are the words of Emma Lazarus inscribed on the Statue of Liberty.
Well, this week, the acting director of Citizenship and Immigration Services, Ken Cuccinelli, attempted to rewrite the poem in an effort to make a case for limiting immigration to the United States. This is Cuccinelli speaking to NPR's Rachel Martin Tuesday.
Would you also agree that Emma Lazarus's words etched on the Statue of Liberty, "Give me your tired, your poor," are also part of the American ethos?
They certainly are. Give me your tired and your poor who can stand on their own 2 feet and who will not become a public charge. That plaque was put on the Statue of Liberty at almost the same time as the first public charge law was passed. Very interesting timing.
Ken Cuccinelli made the comment a day after the Trump administration announced a new rule that would make it harder for undocumented low-income immigrants or documented low-income immigrants to stay in the country. The so-called public charge rule would penalize immigrants seeking benefits, including Medicaid, food stamps, and housing vouchers. by allowing officials to deny green cards and visa applications to those individuals. On Tuesday night, Ken Cuccinelli defended his comments in an interview with CNN's Erin Burnett.
What do you think America stands for?
Well, of course, that poem was referring back to people coming from Europe, where they had class-based societies, where people were considered wretched if they weren't in the right class.
Well, we turn now to the Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Sonia Nazario, who's closely documented why migrants from Central America are fleeing their homes. Earlier this year, Nazario spent a month in Honduras documenting how corruption and gang violence are forcing many people to leave. She recently wrote about her trip in a piece headlined "Pay or Die" in the New York Times. Nazario won a Pulitzer Prize in 2003 for reporting on what became her acclaimed book, Enrique's Journey, a story of a boy's dangerous odyssey to reunite with his mother. Sonia Nazario, welcome back to Democracy Now! Before we talk about this remarkable piece you wrote, if you could respond to President Trump's immigration czar Cuccinelli rewriting the words of Emma Lazarus's poem.
Well, I think most Americans disagree with him, and it's a wholesale attempt to change who's allowed into this country. We give us your rich, don't give us your poor. And of course, this is contrary to the entire tradition of immigration to the United States. So this is what the administration is attempting to do.
And then saying, in fact, those words were written about Europeans.
That's right. Well, at the time, they were largely Europeans who were coming. But in 1965, we changed our immigration laws to amplify who could come to this country legally, and that is the law of the land.
On Tuesday, President Trump was asked to respond to Ken Cuccinelli's comment.
You know, it's about America first. I am tired of seeing our taxpayer paying for people to come into the country and immediately go on to welfare and various other things. So I think we're doing it right.
Sonia Nazario, your response to the president's comments?
Well, the reality is that immigrants who come here legally are no more likely to be on welfare than people who are born in this country. So you're again targeting immigrants, you're scapegoating immigrants, and the reality is that immigrants who have come to this country, whether they are poor or rich, are what have made America great.
Well, Sonia, I wanted to get to your amazing piece that appeared in the New York Times recently, Pay or Die. And here in the United States, we hear a lot about gang violence fueling some of the migration or much of the migration coming from Central America, but people don't really understand what that means. And you've done a remarkable effort here to actually go into what actually is happening. You mentioned that since 2010, 1,500 Hondurans who work in transportation have been murdered, shot, strangled, cuffed to their steering wheels, or burned alive by these gangs because they did not pay the bribes that they were supposed to pay to be able to keep operating and transporting people. Can you talk about this whole issue of how transportation, especially in Honduras, has become this gold mine for the street gangs?
That's right. I was focusing, Juan, on the role of corruption in these countries like Honduras, and that's really the swamp that we have to clean up if we want to help clean up in an attempt to slow this influx of people who are coming to our southern border. The corruption is what allows all the other bad things to happen, including gangs imposing this reign of terror in these neighborhoods and charging this war tax, this extortion tax from anything with wheels, buses, taxis, motorcycle taxis. And from businesses in the neighborhood where I spent time, 1 in 4 businesses was paying a war tax to the gang, and 1 in 4 businesses had shut down completely because they could no longer pay the war tax. So this is paralyzing the economy. So I wanted to show what this was like for these bus owners who are basically told by the gangs, you have to pay up on Monday morning, every Monday morning, thousands of bus owners are going out and delivering these chunks, these bricks of cash to these gangs, or they are murdered if they say no. And along a bus route, if any driver refuses to pay, they'll just kill a driver randomly. And so this is what I saw, that in just the capital of Honduras, these gangs are being paid an estimated $23 million a year in these war taxes.
We're going to break and then come back to hear your description. I mean, this month you spent in Honduras, not only are you covering people risking their own lives or people who were murdered, but you yourself risked your life. We're talking to Sonia Nazario, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, author of Enrique's Journey. She just did a piece in the New York Times about her trip to Honduras called Pay or Die. Stay with us. Absence of You by Villalobos Brothers. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Why do people come to this country? We're talking to Sonia Nazario, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, author of Enrique's Journey, the story of a boy's dangerous odyssey to reunite with his mother. She just wrote a New York Times op-ed piece, the cover story for the New York Times, Pay or Die. MS-13 and 18th Street gangsters want to run Honduras. Cutting off American aid isn't going to stop them. Sonia, you describe hunching down behind a bus driver as he's about to make one of these payments. Just take us on that journey. What happened? Why were you hiding?
I wanted to see what it was like to make one of these payments by these bus owners, and so I went along. One of them offered for me to go along as he made the cash drop. So we hopped into his small black car, and he drove to a place where he picked up a brick of cash, basically $650, and he was paying for his 3 buses and a total of 55 buses just for that week to one gang, the 18th Street gang, one of the 2 largest gangs in Honduras, in Central America. And we hop in his car, we get the brick of cash from the bus dispatcher, and then we start driving up this hill into this neighborhood called Las Pavas, which is an 18th Street stronghold. And as we're going up this hill, there are these gang lookouts, heavily armed with AK-47s, watching. And as we reach the top, these 2 gangsters appear out of nowhere, and I'm crouching in the backseat wheel well trying to tape this on my iPhone with my hand up to the window with my iPhone. But the driver rolls down the window 2 inches, shoves this brick of cash through the window, and these 2 gangsters disappear. And this cash will go through many hands until it reaches the gang leader. But this type of transaction is happening with thousands of bus owners every Monday morning. Monday morning is the day to pay the gangs. And many of these bus drivers pay 1, 3, even 6 gangs to not be killed. And this is what's driving a lot of the despair in a place like Honduras, that because the police are paid off by the gangs, because the politicians are paid off by the gangs, because 30 to 40% of all the revenues of the government are estimated to be siphoned off in corruption by all of these players, that the whole system is rotten and that there's no hope that things will change in a place like Honduras.
Well, Sonia, you mentioned the corruption at the highest levels of the government that allow this to continue, and you document in your story some of the outright theft that occurred by some of the current president's families, that nonprofit groups in Honduras have revealed. But around the same time came this new filing in the court case of the president of Honduras' brother, Juan Antonio Hernandez, who's under indictment right now and in jail for drug trafficking. And one of the amazing things about this this new filing by the FBI is that they specifically name as two co-conspirators not only the current president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, but the previous president, Porfirio Lobo, and they are actually named as having been participants in discussions with drug dealers, in receiving campaign contributions, in promising to protect the drug operations. So if this indictment is accurate, Honduras has become a narco state in effect at the top, while at the bottom of society, all of these gangs are terrorizing the people with government consent. I'm wondering your reaction to this latest filing by the federal government.
A narco state supported by the United States. So there's two ways to steal money in Honduras. You either take money from the narco cartels, or you steal from the public coffers. And the system for doing that in recent years has been to set up these real or fake nonprofits where you send government business, but in reality, you're not doing anything for that, or you're doing less than you should be doing in terms of providing services for the poor in Honduras. And it's alleged that members of the president's and the president are involved in both of these. So you have the president's brother being arrested last year in November for moving, according to the allegations in the U.S., tons of cocaine over more than a decade to the United States and labeling it brazenly TH, Tony Hernandez, with the bricks of cocaine with his initials. And you have allegations that the president's sister, Hilda Hernandez, she died in a helicopter accident in 2017, but that she had siphoned off $12 million from the Ministry of Agriculture into two nonprofits that basically did no work. They were supposed to train people to produce more crops in the countryside, but instead that she used that money for the president's campaign in 2013 to become president, Juan Orlando, and she used it for personal reasons. And now this bombshell allegation that the president basically took money from the narcos for his 23 presidential campaign. So the president was in Washington, D.C. yesterday, and there were a lot of tongues wagging in Honduras wondering what he was doing there.
And, of course, you have the very questionable election that just took place with massive protests throughout Honduras that went on for week after week when he supposedly won against Nasrallah. And this goes back to 2009 with the U.S.-backed coup against the democratically elected President Zelaya. Democracy Now! Followed him back into Honduras when he finally returned. I want to turn to the ousted President Zelaya, coordinator of the Honduran opposition party Libre. We spoke to him last month.
They're going to look for some solution to the system that is provoking the migrants. Because everyone talks about migration, but the causes of migration are the U.S. policies, the IMF policies, the policies of the Southern Command for this region are provoking more and more migrants with each passing day. So militarizing Central America, militarizing Honduras means that escape valve that the Honduran people have had, which is to be able to get work in the United States. And the Honduran people haven't even looked for jobs in the United States. It is the U.S. businesses. U.S. businesses, for example, have large crops and cannot pay a U.S. person to work in the countryside. They give the travel expenses to the family members of those who are their employees. And that is why there's massive migration to work in the United States.
So that's ousted Honduran President Zelaya just recently speaking to us. Sonia Nazario, if you could comment on that, and in your piece, what happens when people refuse to pay? you talk about the murders. And also, if you can talk about the issue of really what you describe as femicide, when you go to the third largest city in Honduras that has the highest number of femicides, the murders of women.
Well, when people refuse to pay, I've centered my reporting on corruption in a neighborhood called Nueva Suyapa in the capital of Honduras, which I've been going to for 20 years. And there was a woman at the top of the hill in a neighborhood dominated by 18th Street. They demand payments from all these mom and pop stores every week. You have to fork over half of your earnings every day to the gang. And she had said, I'm not going to pay anymore. Go earn some money on your own. And they had sent a sicario, a killer from another part of town, so she wouldn't recognize this man. And he came up to her storefront and ordered some orange juice. And as she came back with his change, he shot her in the face. And she stumbled back towards the back bedroom, towards her 4-year-old daughter who was sleeping in the bedroom. She died short of reaching her daughter. That's what happens. And people know that this is what happens to people who refuse to pay the gangs. And so I also reported in a previous story this year in the New York Times about why so many women are fleeing. And increasingly, the narco cartels and the gangs are recruiting women. Some join because there are no other jobs in these neighborhoods. In the neighborhood I was in, 18 to 25-year-olds, half of them are unemployed. And so some join willingly to sell drugs. Some are forced to sell drugs. And when they try to leave that life or leave being the girlfriend of a gang leader, they are murdered. And what I saw in Honduras was that 4 of 10 women, when they are killed with a brutality that far exceeds what is needed to kill them. It's a message. They are shot in the vagina. They are cut to bits. They are skinned alive. I was having horrible nightmares. I'm in therapy now after returning from Honduras. The stories that I heard of what happened to these women. One woman described it as if, like, you're a chicken. They strip you of all of your parts. And the government and the police don't take the claims of domestic violence seriously. They say, well, just go resolve it between the sheets. Maybe you didn't give him last night what he needed. Maybe you fed him something he didn't like last night for dinner. And so, and most of these crimes get no conviction. 9 out of 10 of these murders of women get no conviction. And so the gangs, the narco cartels know that they can get away with this. To address your previous point, you know, the U.S. has a sordid history in Latin America, and we can go back 100 years with United Fruit and dominance of these countries by U.S. companies and replacing presidents that weren't going to be good for U.S. businesses, and more recently in 2009 with a coup where many countries in Latin America and international organizations said, let's not allow this to happen. In 2017, when the current president was reelected in very, very dubious circumstances, other countries called for a re-election, and the United States said, we're good with this. And so I think the U.S. needs to take a hard look at its support of Juan Orlando Hernandez, given the fact that the rot is starting at the top, and given the fact that people will keep surging out of Honduras until this corruption is addressed.
And Sonia, one other point about these gangs that many here in the United States don't really grasp, especially the president is constantly talking about MS-13, is that these gangs started in the United States. They started in the streets of Los Angeles and Sacramento and in the prisons of California from young people who actually were living a large part of their lives here in the U.S., and they were convicted of crimes and they were deported back to Central America and reformed their gangs. Could you talk about this connection between the origins of these gangs and what's going on there now, the violence? It's now the most violent place in the world, Central America.
Absolutely. I live in Los Angeles, Juan, and, you know, first you had the 18th Street Gang, Mexicans during the wars in Central America in the 1980s. Many Central Americans came to the U.S. They got picked on by the Mexicans, so they started their own gang to defend themselves, the MS-13 gang. In 1996, when the U.S. toughened laws towards permanent residents who had committed certain offenses, DUIs, drug offenses, we started deporting permanent legal residents, and we have deported more than 300,000 criminals to Central America. In many of these neighborhoods in Honduras, they say, well, before this, there were gangs, but they were basically controlling turf and arguing over girls, but they were not highly violent. They were not armed in the way that they are now. But once these deportations occurred and you took these gang members and put them into countries where they knew no one and they had to survive, the level of violence ramped up massively. And so this, together with the U.S. use of drugs, we are the biggest consumer of illegal drugs on earth, and many of these drugs that originate in Colombia were coming through Honduras. The drug flights were landing in Honduras, and the narcos and the gangs were trying to control this turf to move these drugs north to us, the consumers in the United States. This really fueled a lot of this violence.
Well, Sonia Nazario, we want to thank you very much for being with us, and just to end by asking, you've covered this, you've been in Honduras many times. What most shocked you this time, and especially as we look at President Trump's rhetoric about migrants coming into this country, about what he calls the invaders?
Well, I think, Amy, the level of rot that starts at the top and goes to the bottom, it affects people having medicines that are basically don't work because people get kickbacks to buy back bad medicines. It affects the lack of teachers in schools. 1 in 4 teachers don't exist. They're ghost teachers because of corruption. It affects people's daily lives. And I think what I'd want to say is that we need to have more compassion towards these people who are running from these very violent circumstances. And I believe that we should not cut off U.S. aid to Central America. I know that this is a controversial point of view, but I think some of this aid I have seen, especially humanitarian aid, not military, not police aid, humanitarian aid has been used by the U.S. to lower violence, to lower impunity, to lower corruption. This is a 10 to 20-year effort, but it is more humane. It is more effective. It is better to find a way to allow people to stay in these countries and improve conditions there. And it's way cheaper than to lock up all these people in these horrible prisons in the United States, which is costing us billions and billions of dollars.
Sonia Nazario, we want to thank you for being with us. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, author of Enrique's Journey, the story of a boy's dangerous odyssey to reunite with his mother. Sonia is a New York Times contributing op-ed writer. Her recent cover story for the New York Times Sunday Review is headlined "Pay or Die." MS-13 and 18th Street gangsters want to run Honduras. Cutting off American aid isn't going to stop them. When we come back, the Trump administration plans to restore the federal death penalty. We'll speak with Sister Helen Prejean, leading anti-death penalty activist. Stay with us. Goes 4 by 9 Inch Nails. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, the Trump administration is moving ahead with plans to resume the death penalty after a more than 15-year moratorium. Last month, Attorney General William Barr ordered the execution of 5 death row prisoners beginning in December. The federal government has executed just 3 people since 1963, the last being in 2003. On Monday, Barr proposed fast-tracking executions in mass murder cases.
We will be proposing legislation providing that in cases of mass murder or in cases of murder of a law enforcement officer, there will be a strict timetable for judicial proceedings that will allow the imposition of the death sentence without undue delay. Punishment must be swift.
Attorney General Barr's comments echoed President Trump's remarks from last week in the aftermath of the El Paso and Dayton shootings.
Today, I'm also directing the Department of Justice to propose legislation ensuring that those who commit hate crimes and mass murders face the death penalty, and that this capital punishment be delivered quickly, decisively, and without years of needless delay.
Well, experts say capital punishment does not help deter homicides, and that errors in racism in the criminal justice system extend to those sentenced to death. According to the Death Penalty Information Center, more than 160 people who had been wrongly convicted and sentenced to death have been exonerated since 1973. The death penalty has been abolished in 106 countries, while another 28 have moratoriums or effectively do not use the practice. The United Nations has called for a global ban on the practice, and Amnesty International calls it the ultimate cruel, inhuman, and degrading punishment.
Well, for more, we're joined by Sister Helen Pajan, one of the world's most well-known anti-death penalty activists. As a Catholic nun, she began her prison ministry almost 40 years ago. She's the author of the best-selling book, Dead Man Walking, an eyewitness account of the death penalty. The book was turned into the Academy Award-winning film starring Susan Sarandon and Sean Penn. Her new book is just out this week. It's called River of Fire, My Spiritual Journey. Sister Helen Pajan is also the founder of Survive, a victims advocacy group in New Orleans. She continues to counsel not only prisoners on death row, but also the families of murder victims. Sister Helen Pajan, it's great to have you back here in our New York studios.
Great to be here, Amy.
Congratulations on your book. As you hear in the last weeks, the surprise announcement of the Attorney General William Barr that they are basically restarting the federal death penalty, and they immediately said they would kill 5 prisoners who've been on federal death row. And then in the wake of the El Paso and the Dayton killings, Barr just announcing that he will particularly go after mass shooters. In this country, it may be that many people agree with him. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm not surprised that William Barr did this or the Trump administration wants to expedite federal executions. It's their whole way of approaching everything, that the way is through violence to try to solve social problems. The federal death penalty is not going to be any more equal justice under law than the state death penalties have been. The mood in the country is to shut the death penalty down, first in practice and then gradually state by state to repeal it. The way the federal death penalty has always worked, it's been up to the discretion of individual federal prosecutors. So we've had side by side, whereas in Manhattan, in New York, the federal prosecutors never went for the death penalty. Over in Texas, they were always going for the death penalty. And this will be no different. So I'm not at all surprised they're doing it. They also seem to have no understanding about how the courts work. They can claim all they want, that they're going to fast-track this and speed up these executions. But there is the Constitution, and there are the appeals. And so I've been talking to federal defenders of these cases. And, of course, they're going to do everything they can to save their client's life.
Well, in your new book, it's more of a recounting of your life story in terms of how your own journey from a child in Louisiana. Could you talk about how you developed first in your ministry and when you decided to go into prison ministry?
Yeah. I mean, it's called River of Fire, and the epigraph in it is from St. Bonaventure. Ask not for understanding, ask for the fire. The fire part was when the passion in my own soul erupted, that I can't just ask God to solve the problems of the world or just be charitable to the people around me, but that the deepest dimensions of the gospel of Jesus called me to justice. So I got involved with poor people in New Orleans, African Americans, who became my teachers, helped me understand what white privilege is, helped me understand what institutional racism. And it's while I was in that soil, in that terrain, living among African American people struggling against poverty and racism, I got an invitation one day to write a man on death row. I never dreamed he was going to be executed. It was in the early 80s, and we hadn't had an execution in 20 years. I wrote a letter to him. He wrote back, and 2.5 years later, he was executed. And that's the fire, because I describe it in the preface in the book. They killed a man with fire one night. They strapped him in a wooden chair and pumped electricity through his body until he was dead. His killing was a legal act. No religious leaders protested the killing that night, but I was there. I saw it with my own eyes, and what I saw set my soul on fire, a fire that burns in me still. So I trace my journey of spiritual awakening from private religion, being apolitical, to rolling up my sleeves and getting engaged with, if justice is going to come, then we have to be the ones to do it. And in our democracy, in our country. So I've had constant dialogue with my church, the Catholic Church, people, first of all, also the hierarchy, but mostly the people. And I've seen how that dialogue pays off. Finally, on August 2nd, 2018, after 1,600 years, Pope Francis declared under no conditions could we ever trust governments to execute their citizens. So when you love your country, when you love your church, you keep up constant dialogue of what needs to change and helping to make that change happen.
I wanted to go back in time to that film that so rocked this nation, Dead Man Walking, that starred Susan Sarandon and Sean Penn, based on your first book. I wanted to go to a trailer of that film.
This man shot Walter Delacroix 2 times in the back of his head, and raped Hope Percy and stabbed her 17 times. In the courtroom at his sentencing, he was smiling and chewing his gum. He is an unfeeling, perverse misfit, and it is time.
You've put in a request to be the spiritual advisor to Matthew Poncelet. This boy is to be executed in 6 days. You must be very, very careful.
Well, Matthew, I made it.
You never done this before?
No.
Never been this close to a murderer before?
Not that I know of.
What is a nun doing in a place like this?
I just want to help him take responsibility for what he did.
I like being alone with you. You're looking real good to me.
Death is breathing down your neck. You're playing your little man on the make games.
You're a white supremacist, a follower of Hitler.
Hitler was a leader, but he was on the right track. That the Aryan was master race.
You are making it so easy for them to kill you, coming across as some kind of a crazed animal, Nazi, racist, mad dog who deserves to die.
You can leave.
I'm not going to do that.
You want to be there to comfort him when he dies? This is an evil man.
But I didn't kill him. I didn't kill nobody. I swear to God I didn't.
I ain't gonna get no chair, Daddy. I'm pissed off at them kids for being parked out in the woods that night. Pissed off at their parents coming to see me die.
You blame the government, you blame drugs, you blame blacks. What about Matthew Poncelet? What, is he just an innocent? If you do die, as your friend, I want to help you die with dignity, and I don't see how you can do that unless you start to own up to the part you played in Walter and Hope's death.
So there you have the trailer for Dead Man Walking. Susan Sarandon would win Best Actress playing you. She won the Oscar for that, and Tim Robbins directed. Bruce Springsteen wrote the music. Everyone was nominated. I mean, the power of this film was the power of your accompaniment, the story that is real. And how you started on that process and go through it till today. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the convicted bomber of the Boston Marathon, one of the focuses of the new discussion about reviving the federal death penalty. You met with him 5 times in 2015, and you testified on his behalf, saying, I presented him as a human being. Talk about what drives you to do this work. What is it like to meet these prisoners, to accompany them to their death?
Well, it's human rights that human beings can never be identified solely with their actions, that everybody's worth more than the worst thing they've ever done. So like at Jahar's trial, all prosecution wanted to do was demonize.
This is the Boston Marathon.
Yeah, the Boston Marathon. And he was the younger brother. All I said, all the words I could get before the jury were, he's a human being and he felt sorrow for what he did. And I showed why I could say that. And
why could you say that?
Because I had met him. And I, at some point, and this came out in the testimony, I just said, Jahar, do you hate us all? Would you drop a bomb on all of us? And he lowered his eyes like this, and he just said, no, of course not. Nobody deserves to die like that. So you had to be so careful in the language. The prosecutor was holding me to just the language you could use, the judge and so forth. But it's with everybody I've accompanied to death. Some of them, most of them were guilty. 2 of them were innocent because it's so broken. And they have done despicable things, but the death penalty is about us. And more people are standing up now, including guards and wardens who have been close to the killing process. We haven't had an execution in Louisiana in 17 years. There's no official thing that has said we're not going to kill people. And that's going on across the country. A lot of times because the guards who've had to do the killing and the wardens don't want to do it anymore because it does nothing and they're so close. And that's been the heart of the conversation in the Catholic Church. And I said to Pope John Paul II, I said, does the Catholic Church only uphold the dignity of innocent life? Well, when I'm walking with a man to execution and he's shackled hand and foot and he's surrounded by 6 guards and they're going to walk him down this hall and strap him down and kill him. And he kind of turns to me and says, Sister, please pray God holds up my legs. Can you help the church uphold the dignity of all life, that to take a human being and render them defenseless and kill them can never be justified? And so Pope John Paul was the first one, and then Pope Francis finally moved it to completion and said, under no circumstances can we ever allow the state to kill. It's human rights that drives me because I get to meet the human beings.
And have you been surprised by the gradual shift in public opinion in this country, and also the fact that most Americans don't realize what an outlier the United States is compared to the rest of the countries in the world on this issue?
No, absolutely. You know what? When I came out of that execution chamber, when Pat Saunier, he was the first, had just been killed, it was the middle of the night. I threw up. I'd never in my life seen anything like this. And I remember thinking very clearly, the people are never going to be brought close to this. There have been 2 court cases to try to make executions public. They're removed from it. They're made to be afraid. These murderers are evil. They're going to come kill you. They're going to get out. They'll kill people in prison. And you make people afraid, and you keep them from seeing what actually happens. So that's why I wrote Dead Man Walking, and why I've been out talking to the American people, mostly through story, to bring them close. Like, the death penalty is about us. People are going to do terrible crimes. But we have the most premeditated protocol of taking a person, rendering them defenseless, and killing them. We're better than that. And most of the people I have in all these 50 states I've been in, they said, well, we didn't know it was like that. Bring the people close to the reality. They have good hearts, and they get it. And so I've been very gratified to see that happening.
You said after you accompanied the first man, Dead Man Walking, that the film is based on, Patrick, that you were sorry at the time you hadn't reached out more to the families of the victims. But that is something you have done now, a great deal over these years. Talk about that experience.
You know, I had a great editor, Jason Epstein, when I wrote Dead Man Walking. And when he saw in the first draft that I'd kind of downplayed not reaching out to the victim's family, I said I'd never done this before. I was so in the human rights of the person being executed. And he said, Helen, you're letting yourself off really easy here. He said, it was cowardice, wasn't it? You were scared. And that was absolutely true. And he said, you need to go back and you need to rewrite that just say what a great mistake it was not to reach out to the victim's family. And see, I just thought they would hate me so much because I was opposed to the execution, and I was wrong. One of the families did, in fact, take that position, but Lloyd LeBlanc, whom I consider the hero in Dead Man Walking, his son David, 17, had been killed, and he confronted me when we met, and he said, "Sister, all this time you've been visiting those two brothers. You didn't come see us. You can't believe the pressure we're under." And that I'd made a great mistake. I hadn't reached out to him. And he was the first one who began to teach me. And then we started the group Survive to help murder victims' families. They are the ones rising up more and more, helping to end the death penalty. When New Jersey did away with the death penalty in their legislature 12 years ago, 62 murder victims' families said, "Don't kill for us. The death penalty re-victimizes us. We need to be able to grieve and we need to be able to move on, but you put us in a holding pattern of 15, 20 years waiting for this justice that never happens."
And all of these prisoners on death row who are, in essence, awaiting their execution, the continued growth of the, quote, death row population, even as you say, many states are not going through with their executions. What's your sense of their lives as well on death row?
Well, it's like a living death in so many ways because you are waiting for death to come. You're in a extremely confined environment, like the death row cells in Louisiana. It's summer. It is so hot. And constantly, the constant noise, all that you are subjected to, waiting to be killed. And you're considered disposable human waste. You get 1,000 signals a day that you're not worth anything. And that's so opposite of what what Jesus is about, what Christianity is about. And when I hear religion quoted, like Jeff Sessions, ex-Attorney General Jeff Sessions, just did to justify the separation of children from their parents at the border, pulling in a religious quote from Romans 13, that if something is the law, God's behind it, it's with the authority of God. I hate to see Christianity used like this. And I've actually had people say, like a member of the pardon board in Louisiana, well, Jesus was executed for our sins. If he hadn't been executed by the Romans, we wouldn't be saved. We got to have executions. Like the image of God behind that is a wrathful God whose sense of justice has been offended and demands a sacrificial death. What kind of God is that? We got to get Jesus right. We got to get Christianity right. And I hate to see religion used to justify violence. It's the opposite of what Jesus was about.
You have the federal government, President Trump and William Barr, saying they're going to resume federal death penalty cases, executions, after almost 20 years. Yet you have the states, one by one. We're in this country almost at a majority of states that are saying no to the death penalty.
Because the Trump administration feels they have absolute power and they could do whatever they want. So they declare, well, we're going to do this. And if we notice a pattern that often the Trump administration has made declarations of what they're going to do to immigrants or the Muslim ban and have no understanding of the courts and the constitutional rights. Yes. So please God, the federal defenders will be in there using the Constitution to block this and to slow it down and make it not happen.
We're going to do part 2 of our discussion and post online at DemocracyNow.org. Sister Helen Prejean is the author of River of Fire, My Spiritual Journey. This follows her book, Dead Man Walking, an eyewitness account of the death penalty. That does it for our broadcast. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. This is Democracy Now!